Chapter 28, The Extra Good Listener. The captain is a gestator for the verdant aether, Dr. Olam said, holding up a narrow bottle containing something uncomfortably reminiscent of a kidney floating around in solution. She just ate what? Tress asked, sitting in his exam room. Not just ate, gestate. It means to incubate. Crow is host to an aggressive strain of the verdant parasite. Your lore calls people like her spore eaters, though I find that an imprecise term. Tell me, where do spores come from? The moons, Tress said. Ah, yes, Ulam said. The moons, as food comes from the kitchen or pottery comes from the Zephyr Islands. There couldn't possibly be another step involved. These things just magically appear. So, you mean, how do spores get to the moons? Rather, Ulam said, what on the moons produces them? I have no idea, Tress said. It was a realization she probably should have made before. Ulam knelt beside her, holding the kidney up to her side. He shook it, then raised his eyebrow. Trade, he asked. This one will make your urine smell of lilacs. No, thank you. Would you sell one? Ulam said. Again, no. Selfish, Ulam said. You don't need two. And how many do you have? Ulam grinned. Touché. To say what? No, it means you have successfully rebutted me. He stood up, shaking his head. Regardless, your moons are home to a group of voracious entities known as aethers. Though the true aethers on the other worlds have a symbiosis with people, the ones on your moons have become insatiable, aggressive, and fecund. I'm not allowed to say that word, Tress said. No, it means... Actually, that word means something very close to what you think it means, but it's a more polite way of saying it anyway. Anyway, the ethers, ethers up above are rampantly self-propagating, and each is connected to a primal element: vegetation, atmosphere, silicate. This alone is dangerous, but your varieties are also highly unstable. The tiniest hint of a catalyst, water in this case, and they pull investiture directly from the spiritual realm to explosively germinate. It's a remarkable process. Tress considered this and found herself with a dozen more questions. Once she might have been too polite to ask them, as he didn't owe her explanations, but there was something about Ulam that invited such conversation. Surely that was it, and not that she was changing. So, Tress said, how did the captain get that thing inside of her? I've been unable to find a satisfying answer, Ulam said, pulling out a rack full of bottled kidneys and putting away the one he'd been holding. Some say it randomly happens to people who fall into the sea, while others claim you have to ingest a very special kind of spore. So she did eat it, Tress said. Maybe, Ulam said, pulling back the sleeves of his suit to reveal a gray-skinned forearm with an ear growing out of it. You have an ear on your arm? Tress said. Oh, yes. But why? Because when I put it on my inner thigh, Ulam said, I kept hearing my clothes brush across in a most distracting way. Isn't your head a better location? I already have two there, Ulam said. Did you not notice them? Ear, regardless. Your captain's affliction is a dire one. She is connected directly to the prime verdant aether growing on the moon. It needs water to survive, and the moon has none, so it somehow infects people on the planet. The vines inside Captain Crow are especially thirsty, and they constantly drain her of liquid. Somehow they use that liquid along with that form from other spore eater hosts around the world to feed the enormous overgrown aether on the moon. I've been unable to discover the mechanism. The vines keep her alive, though, Tress said. They saved her from that bullet. Yes, Ulam said. The Aether protects itself by protecting her, but it's rabid, insatiable, incapable of rational thought. It is sucking her dry. The affliction is progressive, taking more and more from its host. I'm told it is exceptionally painful, and it is always fatal. Merciful moons, Tress whispered. That almost makes me feel sorry for her. Yes, well, most terrible mass murderers like Crow do tend to be well acquainted with tragedy. It makes you wonder who the true monster is, the killer or the society that created them. Tress nodded. That was a trick question, Ulam said. The true monster is the one in that drawer next to you. I gave it 7 different faces. Tress glanced at the drawer in the small end table beside her seat. It rattled. She pretended not to notice. At least now I know why the crew is afraid of her, Tress said. They don't dare mutiny because that thing inside of her would protect her from them. Indeed, Ulam said, I have little doubt the captain could kill each and every person on this ship without suffering any ill effects, other than, no longer having a crew. Temporary immortality does not make one able to trim the sails all by oneself, as the old adage goes. That's an old adage? Odd, Ulam said. I meant odd. I think the tongue I've been using is wearing out. It used to be able to roll marvelously. Did you know that ability is genetic? 1 in 4 tongues can't manage it. He looked closely at her mouth. Tress pointedly did not attempt to roll her tongue. Instead, she tried to figure out Captain Crow's goals. The woman wanted to push the crew, make them desperate, to sail dangerous waters because she was dying and wanted to get as much living in as she could before she went. How long, Tress said, do you suppose Crow has left? Hard to say, Ulam said. I hear the malady usually plays out in under a year, but I gather she's had it longer than that. She is lasting remarkably long, but at this point, I doubt she has months left. Weeks, maybe days? I've noticed she needs to drink nearly constantly to prevent herself from dehydrating and withering away. It was another piece of the puzzle. Unfortunately, Tress had no idea how many pieces she needed or what the puzzle would look like when it was assembled. Was there anything else you wanted? Ulam asked. I have acquired an 8th face, you see, and I think there might be space to graft it on the underside of the thorax. What do midnight spores do? Tress asked. Ulam frowned. He quietly rolled up his sleeve and then stepped closer to Tress, leaning over and studying her with one eye. Hoyd, he called. The cabin boy wandered in. Tress hadn't realized I'd been outside. Did you give Tress midnight spores? Ulam asked. Nope, I said. Good, Ulam replied. I was worried that I gave them to Weave, I said, excited. In my defense, I thought them a kind of licorice. Ulam sighed, folding his arms. Tress couldn't help wondering if that squished the ear on his forearm and what it felt like. Tress, the surgeon said, midnight spores are a very different kind of dangerous from the others. They need a persistent living source of water in the form of the one who germinates them. Like what has happened to the captain? Yes, Ulam said, but temporary in this case. But what do they do? They create midnight ether, Ulam said, also called midnight essence, a blob of goo that will imitate a nearby object or entity. The aether stays under your control for as long as you sustain it. It is more practical than many of the other spore creations, but also more nefarious. If you practice with it, he paused, eyeing her. When you practice with it, we have a great deal of water nearby to drink, along with a silver knife. Most sprouters use midnight aether for spying, but be careful of creating a blob larger than about the size of your fist. So 4 or 5 grains at the maximum. If your creation is too large, it's more likely to escape your control. I barely understood half of what you said, Ulam, she said. Half? Why, I knew you were smart. Your brain is not for sale, Tress said. Oh, I said, you can have mine. It keeps trying to tell me that dirty socks aren't an acceptable strainer for pasta, and if that's true, I do not want to think about it. Ulam grinned, then plucked a little notebook up from inside the pocket of his suit coat and began writing. I'm recording the most embarrassing ones, he said. Tress confused glance. To share with him once he's better? I suspect I can milk this for decades. He did. Hoyd, Tress said, I need to find out how to get to the sorceress. You were there with her. Can you guide me or tell me how to cross the Midnight Sea? He's not going to be of any help as long as he's under that curse, Tress, Ulam said. You'll need to break it. But how? She asked. You don't know, would you? Who would? My face grew thoughtful. During that time period, normally that would mean I was contemplating whether occasionally biting my cheek technically made me a cannibal. But today I was actually thinking about what Tress was saying. For once, it managed to sink in. I can talk, I told her softly, but I can't say anything. I can tell you that you should always wear white to someone else's wedding, which is talking but not saying nothing relevant at least about the curse. Right. Now, this is important. You need to find someone who can talk and say things. That describes a lot of people, Tress said. It was a struggle. The curse tied my tongue and brain in knots. I literally couldn't say too much. Find a person who isn't a person, I said, and can talk when they should not. Tress cocked her head. Ulam stepped closer. That was more coherent than anything he's managed in months, Tress. I believe he's saying something important. It sounds like gibberish. I think he's toying with me. If that's so, then it's remarkably like he used to be. A person who isn't a person and who could talk when they should not? Tress frowned at me, pondering with that blessedly thoughtful mind of hers. Then it clicked. A talking animal, she guessed. I flopped to the ground, letting out a relieved sigh. I was soon lost in thought, trying to decide if cobblers were also good at making desserts, or if that was merely a coincidence. Ah, Ulam said, clapping his hands, then cringing at the sound so close to one of his ears. That must be it. He's telling you to locate a familiar. A what? Powerful users of investiture, magic if you prefer, often associated with talking animals. I've noticed you have a similar lore in your world. Is that not so? I suppose, Tress said, thinking back to the nursery stories. I'll admit, Ulam said, rolling up his sleeve again and getting out a scalpel, that on some worlds my own special species is the cause of these rumors. I don't think that's the case here, however, nor do I think they are the result of the Awakener's arts. Likely, the sorceress and others like her have found ways to invest common animals to enhance their cognitive abilities. Are you even speaking Clisian? Tress asked. Technically, yes, though I'm using connection to translate my thoughts, which are in a language you've never heard of. Regardless, White seems to think you'll be able to find a familiar, a talking animal, if you will. Such an animal would very likely be connected to the sorceress in some way. Familiars are usually small creatures used in spying. Birds, the occasional feline, or a rat, Tress said softly. Indeed, Ulam proceeded to cut the ear off of his forearm. Tress was out the door before he could offer it to her. And that's the end of chapter 28. Chapter 29, The Familiar. She found Huck in her cabin, sitting on the bed, alternating between chewing on a stale crust of bread and reading one of Weave's books, a notebook detailing the use of verdant spores. She'd left it on the bed, and it looked like Huck had nibbled on the corner of the book between bites of crust, though whether that was intentional or due to some ratty instinct, she could not guess. You've been lying to me, Tress said, shutting the door. Huck crouched down, his eyes darting from side to side, seeking the best place to hide. Why didn't you tell me you were a familiar? Tress demanded. Huck said. Were you A companion of the sorceress? Do you know about her? About how to reach her island? Have you been hiding that all this time? Huck said up on his haunches, nose twitching. Uh, I am, yes, a familiar, which is why I can talk. How did you find out? Hoyd, Tress said, gesturing in the direction of the ship surgery. It was difficult for him to speak through the curse, but he gave me enough clues to put it together. Huck, why didn't you tell me? I didn't want to lead you into danger, Huck said. The sorceress is a horrible person, Tress. You shouldn't want to know anything more about her, and you definitely should not be trying to get to her island. Tress stalked over to the bed and knelt beside it at eye level with the rat. You, she said, are going to tell me everything you know about the sorceress, or else. Or else what? He squeaked. Or else, she took a deep breath, nervous as she'd never made a threat this dire as this in all of her life. I will stop talking to you. You won't throw me overboard or something? What? She asked horrified. No, that would be awful. Tress, you make a terrible pilot. Pirate. Please, Huck, she said, tell me what you know. Can you guide me to the sorceress's island? He considered, then began to speak, but cut off. He rubbed his head with his paw. No, he said, I can't. Tress, I'm not what you think I am. I'm not a familiar. Well, I guess I kind of am, but not in the way you're thinking. My whole family can talk. I grew up on a lonely island far, far from the sorceress's realm. So you're what? A descendant of familiars? A good explanation, he said, and then sighed. If you really want to get to the sorceress, your best bet is to break Coit's curse. I can't lead you to her. About that, I'm telling you the truth. I promise. Can you at least help me break Coit's curse? He thought for a moment. I maybe, I mean, I'm not supposed to talk about this, but so long as it's about Hoyd. All right, so here's the problem. The sorceress's magic forbids a person from talking about the specifics of their curse. I knew that already, she said. But I've heard from my family, you see, that one can sometimes get a cursed person to reveal things. A confirmation, you know? So, in a way, you've tricked the curse into giving you new information. But how does that relate to undoing the curse? Every cursed person hears the spell being said and therefore knows the method of their salvation. The sorceress, Tress, she's evil, sadistic. When she curses someone, she wants them to know the path to their freedom and then not be able to tell anyone. That sounds horrendous, Tress said, again glancing toward where she left Hoyd. Yeah, Huck said. I warned you. Look, even talking about her is dangerous. You shouldn't keep trying to get to her. I'm going, she said, so I can either go armed with your information, or I can go ignorantly and be more likely to die. Your choice, Huck. Ouch! No need to step on my trap after it's already around my neck, Tress. I'm trying to help, but there's a lot I cannot, not a lot I can say. You have to find a way to circumvent the curse. Like, assume you ask that friend, how do I undo your curse? Once you know there is a curse, that friend won't be able to tell you. But you say you told your friend a story about someone else who was cured of their curse and asked, what do you think? They might be able to talk to you about a story since it's about someone else's and therefore not about their specific situation. You might be able to sneak useful information out. That sounds like it would involve a lot of guesswork, Tress said, and confusion. And frustration and pain. Yeah, but it's all I have for you, Tress. I'm not an expert. I think you should focus on keeping yourself alive and not on this mad quest to visit the sorceress. Crow has it in for you. I can feel it. I thought that at first too, Tress said, letting herself be distracted. She needed time to process what he'd said before pushing him further anyway. But Crow has turned around. She seems happy to have me on board. And that doesn't worry you more? Huck asked. Now that you mention it, I should be suspicious, shouldn't I? Sporefalls, yes, Huck said. I mean, Crow eats bullets, hates everyone, is determined to give her own crew a death sentence, yet she casually has decided she wants you to stay on board? For reasons. Tress shivered. We might need you to spy on her again. Aquarius paused a little and then started nibbling on the book again. Stop that. I'm sorry, he said as she snatched it away. Chewing makes me feel better. I will spy on her if you want, Tress, but I mean, I don't think I'm very good at it. Last time I'm sure they spotted me. That portal has been kept tightly closed ever since. Plus, there was a cat. Tress tapped her fingers on the book. The captain was wily, and even Hoyd, an obvious idiot, ouch, had figured out Huck was familiar. A girl spending time with a rat that seemed too well trained? Crow probably had her suspicions as well. But perhaps there was another way. What was it Ulam had said about midnight spores? They were useful in spying? She was interrupted by a knock on her door. Tress glanced at Huck, who, with an abundance of caution, grabbed his bread crust in his mouth and hid under the bed. When Tress answered the door, she found Sally standing outside. Tress, the helmswoman said, we need to talk about who you really are. And that's the end of chapter 29. The King's Mask. Sally wanted to know who she really was. Unfortunately, that was a topic of some confusion to Tress herself. In her youth, she thought she understood who she was. Now she was sailing with pirates and learning to use spores. She found herself demanding answers of Ulam and not caring if it was polite. She wasn't even certain she was Tress anymore, or if she'd become someone else. You could say, in other words, that her state at the moment was distress. Well, Sally asked. In her youth, she thought Tress didn't have a lot of experience with lying, but paradoxically, the ones who are most successful at it are the ones who don't do it very often. So when Tress remained quiet but stepped back and gestured for Sally to come in, it was exactly the right thing to do. Sally hesitated. Despite her no-nonsense attitude, she was nervous about entering a sprouter's room. You got used to the idea of silver being around it. It let you ignore, to some extent, the spores, like how you can usually ignore your nose always being in view, or like how people ignore the existential horror that comes from knowing their body is slowly deteriorating every day, time itself marching toward them in oblivion to the cadence of their beating hearts. However, although Sally might have been short of both stature and temper, she was not short on grit. She stepped into the room and shut the door, heroically enduring the chill that ran up her spine and the goosebumps that rose on her arms. Would you like some tea? Tress said, getting out 2 cups, a charming matched pair of a light pale porcelain with silver on the rims. It's delightfully lukewarm. No, Sally said. Look, I know you aren't who you're pretending to be. I'm just a girl trying not to get tossed overboard. Yeah, no, Sally said, folding her arms. I'm not buying that act any longer, Tress. This made Tress a little annoyed. What do you want me to say? Tress asked in a rare bout of pique. I've already admitted I stole this coat. Other than that, I'm an insignificant girl from an insignificant island. There is nothing remarkable about me. Oh, an unremarkable girl who just happens to be unafraid of spores, who just happens to be made our sprouter after only a couple of days on the crew? I'm terrified of spores, Tress said, for once not caring if she was being discourteous. I needed a job on the ship, and this was the only one available. Sally leaned forward, studying Tress. Muna Vales, you are so good at this. I don't see a hint of a tell that you're lying. Because I'm not lying. Look, if you don't believe me, then what do you think I am? A royal inspector, Saleh said, in disguise. This, Tress said, gesturing to her inspector's coat, is a disguise? It's a clever plan, I'll admit, Saleh said. You knew we'd instantly suspect a newcomer, but of course, an inspector would be the last person to wear one of those, except when they're being an inspector, so you knew by wearing it, we'd naturally assume you weren't one. That is, Tress said, an interesting thought process. Yes, Saleh said, I'll admit, I wouldn't have pieced it together if I hadn't discovered that Crow gave you a chance to flee the ship, and you didn't take it. Oh, about that, Tress said, I simply didn't want to abandon you all. Look, I am not lying. I am not an inspector. Sally narrowed her eyes. Yeah? And what about what you did to the cannonballs? Tress froze. Aha, Sally said. You didn't expect me to know about that, did you? I watched Legart's reaction when the ship didn't sink today. He wanted to kill those people, though I haven't figured out why. I do know you're the only one who had access to his munitions to sabotage his attempt. Lord of mercy, Tress thought. If she figured it out, maybe Lagart and Captain Crow have as well. Should have known she couldn't fool such an experienced crew. Tress sat down on her bed, disturbed. Saleh was wrong about her, but the helmswoman, she'd stood up to Captain Crow. She'd prevented a massacre. If Tress was going to trust anyone on this ship, she decided, it should be Saleh. I found out the captain wanted to sink ships, Tress said, to make you all into dead runners. She wants you to obey her unfailingly. Even with her powers, she must fear a mutiny. Sally leaned down, small tight curls of black hair falling around the sides of her face. A common girl, as you're pretending to be, figured out Captain Crow's plot? By accident, Tress said. Really, Sally, I have no idea what I'm doing. Let's assume I believe you, Sally said, and accept that you're not an inspector. Can you prove what you said about the captain? There are false bottoms in the gunnery barrels, Tress said. Lagart keeps sabotage cannonballs in there. I swapped them out for ordinary ones so he couldn't sink any more ships. I don't have the ones I took out. I have the ones I took out, but I don't know if that will prove anything. It's my word against his. I don't need you to confront him about it, Saleh said, beginning to pace. We merely need to get others in the crew to agree to take action. I've organized a meeting with Anne and Fort later tonight. If you brought one of those cannonballs, it might be proof enough for them. They're already suspicious of the captain's motives, and Saleh stopped, then walked back to Tress. And you just manipulated me into telling you about our secret meeting. Damn, you're good. Tress sighed. Saleh held her eyes again, cold as ice with a heart of unyielding steel. Really? Tress asked. That's what you get from my expression? Indeed, Saleh said, behind the fake fear and confusion you're trying to use to distract me. But I believe you in one thing. You're no royal inspector. Oh? You're far too clever for one of them, Saleh said. You must be a king's mask. Oh, that explained everything. Or Trust assumed it would if she knew what on the 12 seas a king's mask was. Everyone knows the king's mask must lie when they're asked what they are, Saleh said, putting her hands on her hips, to protect their secret missions. So I won't try to get you to confirm it. Will you bring one of those cannonballs tonight? If you think it will persuade the others, Tress said, then I will. She wasn't certain what any of them could do against someone like Crow, but it would be good to talk about the things she'd discovered. Great, Saleh said. Meeting is in the quartermaster's room after second evening mess, when night watch is called. She started toward the door and then hesitated. Please don't assassinate anyone before then. With that, she was out the door. Tress sat back on her bed, stunned as Huck emerged. So, King's mask, eh? He said. You sure had me fooled. That was a joke, he said, nibbling on a stale crust of bread again. I'm guessing you don't even know what they are. Not a clue. Secret assassin group, said Huck, maintained by the king to carry out important missions. Supposedly, there are never more than 5 at a time. They are the elite of the elite. And she thinks an 18-year-old girl happens to be one? The masks supposedly take youth potions as disguise their ages, Huck said, but it's possible they don't really exist, and the king encourages the rumors just to make people fear him. Don't blame Saleh. People on ships like this one hover over the edges of the law, even when they're not pirates. Someone like Saleh lives her entire life full of suspicion. She's not dumb, she's just not accustomed to dealing with someone so genuine. It's like you speak an entirely different language. I'll need to convince her of the truth, Tress said, somehow. She found it physically painful to know someone thought she was an assassin. I don't know if I'd go to that meeting if I were you, Huck said. Captain Crow is suspicious of Saleh and the others. I think she's planning to kill them. What? No. When I spied on them for you the other day, I caught a little bit about secret meetings and being rid of them finally. That was before they got to the juicy stuff I told you. That sounded bad to Tress, but also too vague. She stood up again, pacing through her small quarters, listening to the scrape of spores on the hull outside. We don't know enough, Huck. We don't know why the captain wants to make the others into dead runners. I mean, she wants to order them to do something dangerous, but why? Yeah, Huck said. I'm baffled too. Reminds me of a friend of mine. He was a character, I tell you. Once he was offered cheese. By the way, we don't like cheese as much as people think. Wonder how the rumor started. Anyway, I think, Tress said gently, we should stay focused, Huck. We need more information about the captain. Huck dropped his crust. Okay, I suppose, he said. I mean, if you really want me to. Tress immediately felt guilty, remembering his earlier objections. She had no right to ask him to put his life in danger. Never mind, she said, tucking an unruly strand of hair behind her ear. I think there's another way. She looked in the secret compartment under her bed and then brought out a little box full of midnight spores. Tress, Huck said, what are you doing? I'm completely out of my element, Huck, she said. I'm just a girl with a fondness for cups. I have no special training, no experience. I can't outmaneuver Crow unless I use the resources I have. She held up the box. My only real advantage seems to be the fact that I'm slightly less terrified of spores than everyone else. Yeah, but midnight spores? Shouldn't we, work our way up to something like that? You don't start by running a full wriggle-thon. You jog a little first. A what? Wriggle-thon, he said. 40-mile race held every year on the king's birthday. 40 miles, Tress said, fishing in the various drawers of Weave's cabinet. Hadn't she seen her silver knife in here? They'd run out of land and fall off the island if they raced that far. Did they go in circles? Oh, yes, he said. Oh, Tress, most of the islands aren't the size of the rock, you know. Really? She said, pulling the knife out of the drawer. You mean there are some that are 40 miles wide? And bigger, he said. I think one over the Zephyr Sea is 60 miles across. Moons, she said, trying to imagine that much land in one place. Why, in the center, you might not be able to see the sea at all. She shook her head at the crazy thought and pulled out a few water skins. After that, she knelt by the bed, picked out 3 black spores, and set them on the mattress. Huck backed away, towing his crust of bread. She took a deep breath and thought of Charlie. She could do this, for him and for the people of Crow's Song. Solve the mysteries on this ship, protect the people here, and they would point her in Charlie's direction. She raised an eyedropper and released a drop onto the spores. And that's the end of chapter 30.